We're here with the Dragonblade authors Unplugged. See, I thought I was going to be able to make it through the intro this time, and I still didn't.
So close.
It's okay.
So hopefully you have a cup of coffee or your lunch, or have time to take a little break with us and talk to our authors this week. This week we had two releases. We had Jillian Eaton, Seduced by the Scot, which is book 3 in The Perks of Being an Heiress. And I always have to stop myself and make sure I get heiress because I want to make it wallflower.
I know. That's one of the reasons I picked it, so people will be familiar.
I have to stop myself. And we also had Elise, Marion, Spinster Sisters, which is the first book in the Lawless Ladies. And like the Lawless Ladies is the best series title ever because all kinds of good things can happen in that. So we're just going to chat for a little bit, find out a little bit about their books and the inspiration behind them, ask questions. We can see your questions when they come up, so we're happy to answer them live, and sit back and get to know some of your new favorite authors. So Jillian, your book released first this week. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
It did. So Seduced by the Scot, as you said, is the third in my series. It features Lachlan, a Scotsman, the first one I've ever written, and Lady Bryn Weston. It's a little different than a typical romance in that we've already kind of they eloped to Gretna Green, they fell in love, they got married, and now chapter 1 begins 18 months after, kind of that happily ever after where most books would end, and they're estranged, and they've been estranged for a year and a half. They've only seen each other once, and it kind of starts with Lachlan unexpectedly shows up at Bryn's, she's staying with her brother, his estate, and is there to win her back, and she wants absolutely nothing to do with him. She hates him, she doesn't trust him, and the reader doesn't really find out what happened to go from happily ever after to where they are now. It kind of unfolds across the book, and you find out how they got to where they are and then what they have to do to get to where they want to be. So, yeah.
That's such a cool setup. Can you talk a little bit about the inspiration behind it, and also maybe a little bit more about the series, since this is book 3 in the series?
It is, yeah. So my inspiration for this book, I think I've always been intrigued by trying to get a little bit out of the box of kind of the standard romantic storyline. They meet, they have an obstacle, they fall in love, they marry, and then that's kind of it. And this one, I wanted to have them kind of do that behind the scenes, and then the book starts where most books would end. And that was really my inspiration for this, to give myself a challenge and kind of just a little bit of a different dynamic for the readers. In terms of the series, Bryn actually was not supposed to be a heroine. She just kind of popped in book 3. It starts with 3 American sisters, and they're in Boston, and their father has died. It's in Victorian era, 1870, so right after the Civil War. My inspiration for that was actually, I just went and saw the new Little Women in theaters kind of before everything shut down, and really connected with that movie and the characters and the setting and the storyline, and wanted to kind of step out of Regency era and into Victorian era. And basically it's 3 sisters. They've fallen on hard times. They have a mysterious ring that their mother left them. Both her parents have since deceased. And they bring the ring to Boston to get it appraised and hopefully sell it to get some money until they can figure out what they're going to do. And the ring is stolen and taken to London, and they follow the ring across the Atlantic. And from there, things start to unfold. In the very first book, which by Blue Stocking, it's about the oldest sister, Joanna, and she kind of hooks up with the private detective who she hires to help them find the ring. And the second book is about her sister, Evie, and Evie also has a connection through the ring. And if you haven't read the first book, I won't give it away who she kind of ends up with, because it's a little bit of a spoiler for book 1 in terms of just some family ties, and Joanna's finding out some things about her family that she didn't know. And then Bryn ends up being, I wrote her into book 1. She's kind of popped in and then crept more into book 2. And then by book 3, I was like, she needs her own story. So I kind of booted out the sister who stayed behind in Boston and moved Bryn in. So
Is there another book in the series?
There's one more book, Wooed by the Wallflower, and it's about this one is going to be centered on their cousin, Rosemary. And if readers have read the book, they already kind of know who she is going to be partnered with. So I won't ruin it for those who haven't started the series yet. And she was raised in London her entire life and is very excited to find that she has American cousins. So that'll be the fourth and the final book.
Yeah. I think the partnering part isn't always a mystery, though. You know, I think lots of times we know who they're going to end up with, which is why it's the idea of starting the story where you did this book at what it was, 18 months after.
Right. Yep. Yeah. A year and a half. Yes.
Is really interesting because the part that we love is the love part. It's them finding each other, or finding their way back to each other in this case.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. That was, and there's kind of dual storylines in Seduced by the Scot. Mm-hmm. So there's the present day, and I've also never really written a book from that perspective either, which was a challenge, but it was really, I tried writing it kind of totally linear, and it didn't work, because there's a measure of mystery of the reader trying to figure out, what happened, why are they here, where they are, how are they going to fix this. So they actually met as children. She was 14 and he was 16, and they started to fall in love then. And a couple events bring them closer together until they do finally run away and get married. And then there's just this kind of a gap of 18 months, and it delves back into that and what happened and what destroyed their trust. And then towards the end, how do they rebuild that? So,
which I think catches the universal parts of love stories too, because very rarely does the happily ever after just roll on.
Right.
The ever after part. So
yes, definitely.
We had somebody ask about Claire.
Claire is the sister who got left behind in Boston. So poor Claire, originally when I pitched the series to Dragonblade, generally when I write, I kind of have an idea of the first book when I do it just myself. And I don't necessarily, I know it's probably going to be a series, but I don't map out the characters ahead of time. They just kind of unfold for me as I go on. I am not a plotter whatsoever. And with this series, Dragonblade wanted, the 4 books, a basic outline. So I kind of had the 3 sisters, and I knew I was going to have the cousin. But then, like I said, Bryn just jumped out and became this dynamic character. And I had actually people emailing me after book 1, like, is Bryn going to get her story? Like, we really enjoyed her. Who's she going to end up with? And I was like, I don't know. Claire, Claire's really got to get in there somewhere. And then Bryn became such a bigger character in book 2 that she had to have her own story in book 3. So I have not forgotten about Claire. Claire may be making an appearance in book 4, and maybe
I think Claire has to make an appearance in book 4.
Yes, poor Claire. I'm thinking she might somehow end up in England, and maybe around Christmas time we'll find some romance. So we'll have to see.
That would be great.
Yeah.
So Elise, your book, instead of being the 3rd book, is the first book in this series, The Spinster Sister.
Yes.
With the Lawless Ladies. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yes. So the Lawless Ladies series is about a group of 5 friends in the Regency era, 5 women who all for different reasons find themselves in financial trouble. They are struggling to make ends meet, to survive. They have, very limited options, as most women did in those times, especially women of higher society, because they didn't have any skills. They weren't really taught how to survive. And so one of them comes up with the idea of, what we could do is rob carriages. And the rest of the girls are completely horrified. But Wilhelmina, she is the ringleader. And so she decides, listen, we can do this. I know how to shoot guns. I can shoot you, but we shouldn't have to use them. We just scare people into handing over their stuff. If we dress like men, cover our faces, and because there's 5 of us, nobody's gonna, fight back. Right. Yes, that's what they are. And they actually, in the London papers, become known as the Band of Brigands. Everybody's terrified of these 5 men. And they have and that, Wilhelmina's point is nobody's going to suspect women. Mm-hmm. It's the perfect, crime. Yeah. And so the first book actually follows Helena. And as the title suggests, she is a spinster. She's the oldest of 3 children, and her parents both died in a horrible accident. And so she joins up with these ladies to feed her family, to take care of her little brother and sister, and to provide her little sister with a season. Her sister's coming out. And so their only hope is for the sister to marry well. And so they find this Earl, the Earl of Stratford. His name is Sebastian, and he's perfect, except Helena can't stand him. He's arrogant, he's rude, he's a jerk, but the sister likes him. And so basically what happens is Helena and Sebastian end up having sort of this love to hate you relationship, lots of bantering back and forth. And so, it's just about, the forgotten wallflower sort of, finding love, but then having to deal with the fact that she has this terrible secret and what's going to happen when he finds out. And oh my God, courting my sister, not me. So there's, lots of drama going on there.
Yeah, there are lots of things.
Yes.
So
I like
more books in the series?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So right now, no, I was just saying, you were saying there's room for lots of things to happen. That's what I like. Like, I like to set stories up to where it's not just the romance, there's more going on. So a lot of my stories have mystery, adventure, action in them. This one was pretty calm compared to some of my other works, but I definitely liked the elements of, all the different plot points going on at the same time. So there are 5 books planned for the Lawless Ladies series for now. I will say that more than likely there will be more, because like Jillian was talking about earlier, how characters just pop out at you. That happens to me all the time, because I am also not a plotter. I start off
so glad to meet another one.
Yeah, I mean, listen, all these plotters out here, I try and it feels so stifling. Yeah. I like to write character-driven stories. So I always start out with, these are the characters, this is who they are. And I always know where I want to begin and where I want to end. But I like to give myself room to be surprised by the storyline, because if it can take me by surprise, it can take the reader by surprise. And I like that. So for right now, there are 5 planned stories. So Helena was first, and the ringleader, Wilhelmina, will be last. And so there are 3 other ladies in between. And so each book will follow a different lady through her struggles, the things that she's dealing with, trying to stay afloat, trying to survive. And then each of them, of course, will meet their match. And, we'll deal with the complications of class and, wealth versus poverty. In some cases, like for book 2, the intersection of race and class in a Regency era story. The hero, no, that's not the second book. It'll be the third book. The hero of the third book is Black, and he's, of the working class. And then the heroine is like the belle of the ball, super popular among the town, all of that. So it's just, I really like to delve into things like that. And I think it adds dimension and interesting facets to the story.
Yeah. I think anything that readers' brains are good, if it gets us thinking about things. It's
exactly. And I mean, I learned a lot from reading romances as a teenager. It made me interested in, history and things like that. So I like to incorporate things like that, that will make the reader want to investigate further, look deeper into history, but, also enjoy the story.
Yeah. Did you start reading romance when you were younger?
Yeah, I was like 12. But my parents, they hated it. And I pick on them all the time, because I'm like, all those years you spent trying to stop me reading romance, and look what I grew up to. They're so proud, though. They're great. They tell everybody, my daughter is an author. But I had a cousin who I spent summers at there. My cousins babysat me and my brother. She's like 5 years older than me, which now isn't that big a deal. But when we were younger, it was. So she babysat, and she had all of these novels that she would keep under her bed. And so she'd be like, yeah, you want to read this? Here you go. And I was already, I know. I was already a bookworm. Like, I was going, like, my goal when I was in middle school, I got to my school in the 7th grade, and they were like, we have 400,000 books in this library. And I was like, I'm going to read every last one of them before I leave this school. I was into like Babysitter's Club, Sweet Valley High, Nancy Drew, stuff like that. But then she started lending me these romance novels, and I was like, oh my God. And I just, even at 12, historical was my favorite. So some of my first were like Danielle Steele, contemporary. But once I discovered historical, I was hooked. And so we would, I don't know if libraries still do swap books.
Yeah.
They do. Okay. I was like, I haven't been in a library and I don't know how long, and that's shameful. I should do better. But yeah, we would take a backpack full of books, whatever books she wanted to swap. We'd walk to the library, and it's Texas in the summer. But I mean, we were sweating, panting, but it was worth it.
All in these books.
Yeah, we'd go to the library, get that air conditioning, and then go to the swap book section, and we would just pick. And I mean, that was what started it. And so she would start giving them like, "Hey, you can have this one, or you can borrow it, bring it back." And then when I got to high school, they were in the high school library. I'm like, okay, like nowadays, I would really love to poke around a high school library. Like, do y'all still have these like sexy romance novels in high school library?
Like the bodice rippers with
they were
the covers. Yeah,
I have such a love for those old school bodice rippers because it's what I cut my teeth on. I know that they can be problematic, and like, you know, a lot of people don't really care for them now, but there are some that they still have like a really special place in my heart, because those were the days. And I actually started writing romance novels in high school. And this was before everybody had computers. So I was writing them by hand on notebook paper. Yeah. So my parents, I was hopeless. They tried, but you know, you can't fight fate.
Well, and like, I figure anything that gets you reading is a good thing.
Yes, yes. And that's how I feel with my kids. I mean, obviously, I don't want my daughter who's 13 reading my books just yet. Not because there's sex in them, but because I don't want her looking at me like, you wrote this? So when she picks up a romance, like, to me, my vocabulary was off the charts because of historical romance. I learned a lot about history. I mean, and yeah, there was sex in it, but that's not what I was reading it for. So I feel the same way. Like, as long as you're reading, like, that's what's important, is that especially nowadays with all the technology and all the distractions and things, for kids to want to pick up a book at all, you know, that's a good thing. So,
yeah.
Jillian, did you start reading romance too, or did you start in a different direction?
I started romance. My mom, we had an old New England farmhouse up in Maine, and there were these built-in drawers. And I just remember one day, I was probably around the same age, like 10, 11, 12. And I pulled out the bottom drawer, like this huge big wooden drawer, and it was just full of these old vintage romance books.
Nice.
Like Kathleen E. Woodwist, Joanna Lindsay.
Like
Joanna Lindsay. Yeah, like vintage Joanna Lindsay. Like Hearts Aflame is still my number one favorite book of all time. I've read it like so many times. So there are probably like 120 books in there. And like over the years, I read every single one, like multiple times. And actually, when I started writing, like in middle school and high school, same thing, just like little stories, jotting here and there. I actually started writing like young adult first. I was very into fantasy and sci-fi as a kid. As I also was reading the romance, I read like everything. And it wasn't until probably like 2010, I think, I started writing historical romance. It was the number one thing I loved to read. I was on like a Judith McNaught, Lisa Kleypas like binge, rereading all of their books. And I was like, I'm writing like my young adult ones, and like they're good, but I should like start writing romance. And that's what I've done since.
So what is the part about historical romance that attracts you? What is there a time period that speaks to you? Is there something about reliving the history part of it that's attractive to you?
I've always, just my personality, I've always loved old things. Like I'm drawn to like vintage clothes, old houses, just anything old desks. Like I have an antique desk that I write on. And I think I just have always been fascinated with the Regency era ever since I started reading Judith McNaught. I think she's one of the first authors I read in an interview, so I'm not sure if this is 100% correct, who really started bringing that era into the live stream and kind of making it almost its own genre. And I love thinking that these people who lived, all those years ago, they still had like the same needs and desires and thoughts and wants and fears that we have now as women, but they had all these constraints put on them that we don't have. So kind of just that difference. I really enjoy exploring, plus the clothes and the carriages and all that fun stuff too.
Well, and both of you have talked about women in difficult situations having to make their way in a society that was not necessarily supportive of women at the time. And I think that idea of strong heroines who find their place is part of the reason that the genre is so strong and that we like to read it so much, because it gives us something to daydream about. So is there something particular about historical romance, Elise, that you're drawn to?
Oh,
Clothes
I mean,
food or
yeah, to me, it's about the and I have read some amazing contemporary romance and some paranormal. I'm like Jillian. I like to read a little bit of everything. I also love sci-fi and fantasy. I'm a huge Game of Thrones fan, and I'm still waiting on that next book. We've been waiting for
it's never coming.
But man,
at least I always tell myself, if I write slow, at least I don't write that.
Listen, yes, they're nobody writes slower than that guy. Jesus, I'm like, you've been writing Winds of Winter for 15 years. Can we just? God. But anyway, for me, it's about escapism, and so I like the idea of going back in time and dealing with to me, I feel like the romance and the sensuality of it is more potent in historical because there's so much forbidden area you can play with. There's so much that women were not allowed to do. And so not that contemporary can't be sexy and whimsical, because it can, but to me, I just feel like historical is so much more whimsical because there's so much more you can do in a situation where your heroine can't even go for a walk by herself. Do you know what I'm saying? Right. And at least if she's of a certain class. And so, I mean, and I just became so fascinated when I got hooked on the historical romances with, settings, places, clothes. God, I love historical fashion. And just the gallantry and the ceremony of just a regular conversation. It's just, to me, it just feels like a pure escape, completely removing myself from the present. And so that's, and so for me, I also like we were talking about, heroines, being able to write a strong heroine in that time period. To me, it means so much more than writing a contemporary or a modern strong heroine, because nowadays we're all expected to be, feminist and I am woman, hear me roar type thing. And I'm not saying it's easy, because it's not, to be a woman nowadays, but to be able to step back in time and have a female character and really be able to have her grow and develop through the challenges of the Regency or the Victorian era, it's just really satisfying. It's one of my favorite things about writing the genre. So most of my heroines tend to be very strong, opinionated, blue stockings, wallflowers, widows, right. And even when they're innocent, like Helena, she's a spinster, and she's completely innocent, but she's a spitfire. She doesn't take anybody's crap. She speaks her mind. And so that's just, I can't get with weak heroines. It's one of my pet peeves. It drives me absolutely nuts. So I try not to write characters like that.
I think we like to read the strong ones too. So
yeah, for sure.
Do either of you do any research or have any specific things you look for before you start? I know you both said neither of you plot heavily, and I can totally get behind that, because I get bored if I know where everything's going to go. Right. But do either of you do research when you're trying to work your way through a series or
Yeah, definitely. I mean, especially with this series, because it was an era that I wasn't that familiar with, and you wouldn't think there'd be huge changes going from 1820 to 1870, but it was a whole different world. Fashion, clothes, women did have slightly more rights, not as many as you would hope in that time frame. Politics, everything is very different, and I really enjoy kind of delving into that and noting those differences, particularly in the fashion, and in the dresses, and the bustles, and all of that. So I just Google is my best friend when I'm researching. I don't have one book or a set of book I just flip to. I Google. I've gotten really big into language. So before I use a word that I'm not sure if it's too modern, I have a website and I plug it in and it tells me when, which is cool.
That is cool.
Graph and tells me when that word was commonly used. And occasionally it's been, it like becomes popular in 1890 and I'm like, oh, like would anyone really really know? But I try to stay as authentic as I possibly can. So I do like the research element and kind of the challenge of making the books authentic and putting in those historical details, but weaving them in a way that's not boring or stilted or you're start to read it as like a nonfiction. It just kind of fits in and flows with the storyline.
So yeah, I do. So like back before I first published my first books, I did like a lot of base research. And so the majority of my self-published books are like historical fantasy. So not fantasy like dragons and magic, but fantasy as in I take historical elements into, and I create my own setting that's fictional. It's like fictional kingdoms, fictional countries, so that I can make my own rules. Like I had story ideas that like I literally could not make them happen within Regency or Victorian era. So I was like, I'm just going to make up my own thing over here. But I did a lot of base research because I still wanted those fantasy books to have that rich historical feel and feel like those old, Joanna Lindsay type books. So the Lawless Ladies series is my first Regency series, but I've done so much research already on the Regency. And I mean, for a long time, Regency was all I read. And so reading those novels led me to research just because I'm a nerd like that. So if I see or read something, I'm like, ooh, is that true? I got to go see what that's about. And so for the Lawless Ladies series, I did a lot of reading up on like highwaymen of the time and also how law enforcement worked or didn't work. There really wasn't any in the Regency era.
Yeah.
You had, there was no police force. You had Bow Street runners. You had the city watch. But I mean, it was you reacted to crime. You didn't prevent crime, which allows me to get away with a lot. Like if I had this in the Victorian era, they would have been caught their first night and put in jail. And so I did a lot of research about like highwaymen and like the way that they were romanticized by the public. And things like that. I did some on, like titles and forms of address to make sure I had everything right, because that's one thing
that's huge.
Yes, and it can be so hard to get it wrong. So I have like a tab.
And our readers will know if you do.
They will know, and they will let you know that they know.
Regency readers are some of the most hardcore. Like they do not play. We're talking about people who cut their teeth on Jane Austen and Georgette Heyer, and you had better not. Don't even. There are some things you just don't mess with. So I have
part of the journey too. It's like if I'm going on a ride, I want to make sure that whoever's taking me on the ride knows where they're going. So.
It would kind of be like walking through Hyde Park in the 1800s and being like, why is a flamingo here? That doesn't belong here. That's out of place. So I have a tab of things that, so like if I quickly just need to do a quick check, titles and forms of address is one of them. Famous landmarks is another. So different places, clubs, gentlemen's clubs, shops and things like that. And I mean, a lot of times, and I mean, maybe Jillian can identify with this. I'll find in the middle, since I'm not a plotter, in the middle of my writing, I'll go, ooh, is this a thing? Can I do this? And I'll stop writing and then go chase, whatever thought I had. And there have been times I have lost a whole day because I have stopped in the middle of a chapter because like I have to figure out how I can make this work, and can I make it work and make it realistic or whatever. And I'll go chase, the research or whatever. So but you learn a lot that way, I think.
Oh my goodness. That reminds me, for Seduced by the Scot, they had to travel from England to Scotland, and in Victorian era, trains became like train transportation. They had it in Regency era, but in Victorian era, it was like a whole new thing. And I spent like 5 hours, and I had a map and I had like notes, and I'm not that great at math, so I had to have my husband double check everything. But I was like, if they leave here and they get to like here, and then like I had everything mapped out. So it was like as realistic as it could possibly be. And it ended up being maybe a paragraph of train travel that it just, but it worked. If anyone reads Seduced by the Sky and you're wondering, in that one paragraph, that is an accurate timetable that it would have taken to travel.
I love when you can trust an author to do that too, because it means that I can buy in wholeheartedly to the story because I know that you've done the work to make sure that that's right. So both of you mentioned that you don't plot. Can you talk a little bit about where you write, or I know Jillian, you're writing with young children now. Can you talk about where you like to write? Do you have offices, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, coffee shops again?
So I have my office, which I'm in now. It's kind of like an office / guest bedroom, but we haven't had many guests over the past year and a half. So it's mostly just been my office, and I can shut the door. I'm very fortunate in that my husband works from home when he's not traveling. And speaking of the pandemic, he's a sales manager, and his number one sales territory was Canada, which he could not get into for a year. So it wasn't that great for his travel schedule, but it was very good for me because he was home and could take the kids. And I enjoy writing in the morning. Like first thing, I get up, I make breakfast for everyone, I grab my cup of coffee, and then I try to run upstairs. And if I can get in like a solid 2 hours, I've learned to try to write very quickly in that time period. Because I'm not one of those, I know some people, they can write late at night, and I can't. Like maybe I can plot or do something else. That's usually when I do my marketing or catch up on emails and stuff. But kind of the morning with my coffee and just those 2 hours, I try to do pretty much seven days a week. But that's my spot. So.
Do you have word count goals, or do you just
I consistently give myself word count goals, like for the day and for the week, and I never meet them. So I like my diet goals. Like it's very nice to have them.
Right here.
It doesn't happen. Thankfully, Dragonblade has been, Kat and Sean have been very understanding. When I had my first book was a couple weeks late, and I let them know ahead of time. I'm like, it's just, I'm just not a fast writer. I know some people 3 months and they can have a full finished, like 80,000 word book done. And I am not one of those people.
I'm
so jealous. I'm so jealous. I can't. I just
don't be. It's chaotic. You don't want to be in here. Not fun. It's an advantage in some respects, but you can burn out really fast. You can stress yourself out. And it literally, when you get to a certain point in the book, when you're closing in on the end, it's an obsession. Like you can't stop. You can't stop. Like I literally will tell my husband, there's chicken nuggets in the freezer. I got to finish this book. So, I feel like there's like everybody's always like jealous of, like you want what you don't have. And so it's like there's pros and cons, I think, to being an author who can take their time and then being in the organized chaos of this. It's a bit much sometimes, I'll be honest.
So do you write in a home office, or do you like the noise? Do you like ambient noise around you, or how do you like to write?
So my situation changes between the school year and the summer. So like right now it's summertime and my schedule's all over the place because I've got kids at home and my husband travels for work. So like right now he's out of town. So it's just me and them. So there are days where I don't work at all because it's like, hey, let's go to the pool. Let's go to the park. Let's go, do this. And like, we just got home from vacation and things like that. But so during the summertime, I'll write wherever and whenever I can. My sleep schedule is all over the place. Like I rolled out of bed an hour before this chat. And I've had coffee and nothing else. But
I'm such envy.
Yeah, well, listen, because my kids are older now and they sleep in. But Jillian, I've been where you are with the young kids. I have rolled over in the summertime to have a 3-year-old in my face like this, poking at me.
5:40 a.m. is sleeping in for the 3 of them. It's like it just happened like 2 months ago, and I can't. So we're up at 5:40, and I go to bed at 9. Like I've been trying to stay awake and watch the Olympics. And I just can't do it.
So I have totally been there. So like my oldest is a teenager now, and my boys are 8 and 10. But when they were little, it was like I had a 4-year-old and a baby, things like that. So I've definitely been there, like trying to rock a baby and like write. So I wrote my first novel with my son strapped to my chest because he was colicky and he always wanted to be held. But yeah, so during the school year though, I'm much more organized, and I do have a home office. And that's where I do the majority of my work during the day. So I usually don't start my day writing because I'm not a morning person. I have to drink coffee. I have to eat breakfast. I have to do like my morning exercise. I do yoga in the morning. I have to get flowing first. And so usually during the school year, I get up and take the kids to school, and those are, during the school year, I have to get up early because they have to get to school. And so I am not like before 8 a.m. Don't talk to me. So I usually start my day with all of the behind the scenes, like marketing, administration, email, all that sort of thing. And then usually I'll have lunch. And then by then everything's kicked in. I'm ready to go. And I'll write up until it's time to go pick people up from school. I also used to give myself word count goals. And I still do during the school year. I usually give myself a word count goal. And some days I meet it. Some days I surpass it because I am a fast writer. But I try not to pressure myself because I learned the hard way I've been doing this for 10 years. I've learned the hard way that burnout is real. And pressuring yourself is one of the worst things you can do. So during the summertime, I try to just be really flexible. And I try to just remind myself, because I'm a perfectionist. I'm like a type A personality. So I'm really hard on myself. So I just, I try really hard to remind myself to cut myself some slack. I'm dealing with raising kids and, all the household stuff that comes with that, and husband coming and going because of his job. So, it's a process. But I try really hard to, I don't like noise. So I have noise canceling headphones. I do need music though, because it kind of just helps block out everything else. And my house gets loud, kids and dogs, things like that. Yeah.
How many dogs do you have?
2. I have 2 dogs. And one
small kind.
They're one medium and one who's gonna be big. So I have a black lab. I have a black lab who's full grown and she's like a mid-size. And then I have a German shepherd who's still a baby, but she's already gigantic.
Oh my
God. That's girl. Like another child.
But she's a she, so,
Yes, she is. I mean, anybody who knows anything about German shepherds know the energy level is off the charts. They have so much energy. They love to play. Like she wakes up on 10. As soon as I put my feet on the floor, she's jumping at me, running around. She's ready to go. And I'm just like, girl.
They want jobs.
Listen, they need something to do. So I mean, man, that's like a whole other child, and she's barely over a year old. So,
oh goodness,
she's a baby. She's a huge baby.
Jillian, you said you had a mule and chickens and a horse and dogs too?
Yes. So we are fortunate to have a 5-acre farmette. I'm in Pennsylvania for those who don't know. And we have 2 dogs. They're both older. When we moved in here about 3 years ago, we had 3 older dogs and they all passed within a year of each other. So we kind of took a year off and then went out and decided to adopt 2 more senior dogs. So we have a 13-year-old cattle dog, Jack Russell, mixed scarlet. And then we have a 9-year-old toothless Yorkshire Terrier Min Pin, Yogi, who we just got about 3 months ago and who spent 8 years in a crate from like 8 in the morning to 8 at night. Where his owner very kindly finally realized he just didn't have time and brought him in, and we scooped him right up as soon as we saw his picture. So we have those 2 guys. I think Yogi's sleeping around here somewhere. And we have 2 chickens. We started with 5 and we're down to 2, which if you have chickens, you would understand. And we have a miniature donkey, my first one, old Amish draft mule, Penelope. And then I have an ex-thoroughbred racehorse. I've always had horses. I was fortunate enough to grow up riding them. And I got him when he was
so jealous.
Off the track, and he is now 19 and retired. So that's our crew. I've been trying to get another mini donkey in the mix because they do really well in pairs. But so far, my husband is not. He doesn't want to he opened the door a little bit and I immediately brought home the 3 horses. Oh, he slammed it shut again.
He's like, nope.
We're good.
Because there could be ostriches and stuff. Amanda has no idea what's coming through the door the next time.
It's fair. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Ladies, it was great to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Congratulations on your releases for our readers.
Thank you.
It's Seduced by the Scot, which is book 3 in the Perks of Being an Heiress.
Yep.
Stop every time and pause.
I know.
And The Spinster Sister is book 1 in the Lawless Ladies series. I'll pop the links in the comments so you can find them easily if you don't have them already. And if you don't have them, you should. So thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today, ladies. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.
Bye.